Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Well, it's a 3-day workshop, you said, so you've already been exposed to a lot of analysis of India's foreign and security policies in various domains, and since we are an open and democratic society, our doors are very open to foreign diplomats, and you get your inputs not only from the press but from a lot of people you meet. And since we are very liberal with our views and analysis on foreign policy and other issues, you must have got a welter of opinion from diverse sources. Whether you've been able to synthesize it and get clarity as to what our policies are, I don't know. Maybe the more clever amongst you have been able to do that, or the more interested ones have been able to do that. The point I'm making is that since we don't publish strategy papers, white papers, doctrines and things like that, so there is no anchor document or documents that you can look at and then try and analyze individual foreign policy decisions we make in the context of those doctrines and documents. Nevertheless, I'll give you my view of what are the fundamentals of India's foreign and security policies with focus on great powers and the neighborhood. Well, first of all, we are aware of our weaknesses, our shortcomings, our lack of a capacity to really make our influence felt around the globe, yet we have a self-image. And in an inchoate way, this does color the approach and thinking of our policymakers and our society. And that is that we are a very large country, geographically, demographically. We pride ourselves on the fact that we have made major contributions to global civilization. We think we have a lot of human and economic potential, which is now beginning to actually rise to levels which we think will give us potential in the future to be more meaningful and relevant to the rest of the world. We have a certain view on how international relations should be conducted, or relations between countries should be conducted, with large importance given to abjuring violence in the search for political solutions to difficult problems as much as possible, and weigh in favor of peace and development. Every country says that, but leave aside the discourse and the diplomacy part of it, there is something in this tradition of thinking in this country that we should live and let live, live and let live. Tolerate diversity, don't impose your thinking and views on others, don't launch crusades in favor of this concept or that concept. We are largely content with ourselves, and we don't feel the need to impose our thinking and our concepts on others, except in a general way that we should all live peacefully together if we can. We also now have developed very significant strategic capabilities, which are essentially defensive in nature, but they give us the confidence that we can protect our interests better in a competitive world. Now, because of this kind of thinking, we've always tried to follow as much as possible an independent course in our foreign policy. It is commonly said that the world was divided into two blocks during the Cold War. But they forget that the majority of countries in the world were not part of either one or the other bloc. there was this non-aligned bloc, but nobody talks about three blocs during the Cold War period because it doesn't fit into the strategic thinking of essentially the Western countries and, of course, at that time the Soviet Union. But India was a leader in terms of formulating this whole approach to foreign policy, that we should not become a pawn in the Cold War politics of the two blocs and maintain distance and independence of foreign policy and try and deal with both blocs in a constructive way as much as possible. And the rest of the world, a large part of the developing countries, bought into that, though of course it's never such a black and white situation, such a neat position that fingers can't be pointed out, oh, during that period you were more close to the Soviet Union than to the Western world. But these are just points of detail. The larger picture is that we maintain the independence of our foreign policy. And this has continued. We now talk about strategic autonomy. It has a few thoughts behind it. The thought is not so much, actually the thought is not non-alignment, because you don't have to choose. And there are no blocks today. But what strategic autonomy means, that when it comes to core issues of our national security and our foreign policy, we will retain our independence in the larger strategic sense, which also means that we're not going to join any military blocs formally. We have strategic partnerships with a whole host of countries. I've even forgotten the number of strategic partnerships that we have developed, which also means that if we are strategic partners of a whole host of countries, and many of them are antagonistic to each other and see each other as strategic enemies, we have that much margin of maneuver and that much scope for pursuing a policy which fits into our larger national interest, which is why we have, for example, developed very close ties with the United States. If there is one single feature of our foreign policy in recent years, it has been the remarkable development of our ties with the United States of America. This is partly as a result of the need to adjust our foreign policy after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it's not entirely that. It is a two-way process where the United States has also felt the need to come closer to India for a variety of reasons. Not the least is India's economic potential and how they place India in the decades ahead as one of the largest economies in the world, and therefore the need to keep engaged with India. We, as you know, are now a major defense partner of the United States. We have started purchasing huge quantities of arms from the United States, maybe $15 to $18 billion, which is a great vote of confidence in our longer-term relationship with the United States, because there always has been this fear and concern that at critical moments you can never rely on the American system not to spring surprises. And if there are decisions taken which are not in accordance with U.S. foreign policy objectives, we may land ourselves in a situation where we may be subject to restrictions, sanctions, or whatever. And this has happened in the past. But I think the new thinking and approach is that this is unlikely to happen. The level of trust is rising. We've signed foundational agreements with the United States. We've done it slowly. We are not rushed into this. We've taken some time, maybe to the irritation of the Americans, to reach that point. And we now have this joint vision for the Indo-Pacific region, which was formulated during President Obama's visit here, but now it has evolved into this Indo-Pacific concept, where insofar as the maritime domain is concerned and the challenges that we foresee will arise in this domain, the two countries feel the need to work together. And if it's a question of burden sharing in terms of providing security to the sea lanes of communication, or in general in this area, I think you see in concrete form this kind of burden sharing that is emerging in the Indian Ocean area, or in the larger Indo-Pacific concept by our Malabar exercises, in which now Japan has been included, the Quad, which has not yet reached the political dimension that, for example, Australia would like it to reach, but we've had 3 official level meetings of the Quad. And this is the general direction in which our cooperation, which is anchored in the India-US relationship but extends to key partners of the United States who are also becoming key partners of ours. This is the general direction in which I think things will move. The India-Japan relationship has progressed under Prime Minister Abe remarkably. We have overcome the nuclear dimension of this relationship, and we are very closely looking at the defense dimension, notwithstanding the fact that Japan has certain constitutional restrictions, which it will take time for the government and its society to overcome. But nevertheless, we now have exercises with Japan, both land, air, and sea, which is remarkable in terms of where Japan stands in terms of assuming defense responsibilities. And there is some potential for actual collaboration in defense technologies. A couple of projects have already been identified in this regard. Now, there is, of course, some issues in our relationship with the United States. It depends on how much importance we would like to give to those differences or lack of convergence in terms of shaping our overall relationship. This is a very important decision that has to be taken at the highest levels. It cannot be a perfect relationship. United States doesn't have a perfect relationship with anybody, including its allies. So we have problems with the U.S. relationship towards our west, Pakistan, and now Afghanistan. With Pakistan, things seem to have become a little more clear in terms of U.S. position on certain aspects of Pakistan's policies, but there are mixed signals. And now the United States is using Pakistan to deliver Taliban to the negotiating table in order to enable the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan. Now, none of us should have any illusions as to what the Taliban stands for, its ideology. And much more than that, if everybody is of the view, at least on paper, that international terrorism is a fight that involves all countries, and it's an international problem, and there can't be any double standards or confusion on this score, then if you just ask yourselves, what is it that has brought America to the point where it's willing to engage with Taliban? It's not that the Taliban has achieved military successes on the ground. It's because of terrorism. The kind of terrible terrorist attacks that keep occurring in Afghanistan has pushed the United States and others to deal with the Taliban. So therefore, it sends a lot of confusing signals about position on Islamic radicalism, on terrorism, etc., etc. Similarly, everybody is aware that, or ought to be aware, that Pakistan, which gave shelter to Osama bin Laden and to the Taliban and to Haqqani group and others, it has been in league with these forces, and they see the Taliban as the only instrument they have to dominate Afghanistan's foreign and security policies, especially towards India. And yet Pakistan is being absolved of all this, of these sins, if you like, and is actually now its connections with the Taliban, instead of opening it up to sanctions, is actually being seen as a positive point where they can bring the Taliban to the negotiating table. We have CATSA, which has created big problems for us in terms of our relationship with Russia, which I'll come to in a short while. And walking out of the Iran nuclear deal also has meant a huge disturbance in our ties with Iran. So in terms of our defense relationships, in terms of energy security, there are certain aspects of US policies which create real problems for us on the ground. But then we have to balance the positives and the negatives. To my mind and to the thinking of many, for India at this point in time, there is no relationship in the overall sense which is more important to us than that of the United States, with the United States of America, with a bilateral trade and services volume of $130 billion. United States is the biggest source of investment of technologies. In all the areas of our knowledge economy, we are tied up with the United States of America. Overwhelmingly, our people-to-people relationship with America is very different from that we have with other countries. We have about 200,000 students studying in the United States. So, and then if we place what the United States is doing in our region in that context, I think the answer seems to be clear, that we have to deal with these irritants and continuing engaging the United States to see how we can overcome some of these difficulties, and if push comes to shove, to stand up to the United States and then see what happens, because there will be a cost to pay, even for the United States, if it, based on its legislation, tried to impose sanctions on India for continuing our ties with Russia or Iran. We are also not in agreement with the United States in terms of its policies in what you call the Middle East, we call West Asia. Because we think we are in the middle of the East, not those fellows who are to the west of us. Regime change policies, destruction of these authoritarian, no doubt, dictatorial, no doubt, but secular regimes. The lessons not learned by promoting jihad in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, and then, in fact, creating conditions under which these jihadi forces and Islamic radicalism has even grown stronger and become more of an international phenomenon because of all these regime change policies. This has direct impact on us because of pan-Islamism, because all these forces are interlinked with each other in terms of ideologies and madrasas and the internet and the Friday sermons and what have you. So the worst of this kind of radicalization, which appeals to minorities in other countries, affects us too, and we have to be extremely vigilant. Now, so far as Russia is concerned, if you look at the relationship from the time that was forged in the 50s, there hasn't been any other relationship between consequential powers which has been so stable. Relationship with US and Russia have gone through various phases, ups and downs. US and China have gone through ups and downs. China and Russia has gone through ups and downs. China and US has gone through ups and downs. But the India-Russia relationship has never been subject to this kind of fluctuation. So there has been an underlying strategic stability in the relationship, because I believe that the geopolitical interests of the two countries prior to the Cold War and post the Cold War are convergent. That is one aspect. The other, of course, is that Russia, despite the fact that it is taunted for now being a merely regional power, and its policies in Europe have raised a lot of concerns in Europe, and the United States is subject to all kinds of sanctions. We don't see Russia through those optics. Our thinking about Russia is altogether different. We don't see it as a disruptive power. We see it basically as a defensive. Whatever it does is basically seen as defensive moves by Russia, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which for the Russians obviously was the biggest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century, no doubt, because if big countries collapse like this, and big countries which are able to defend themselves, which are formidable nuclear powers, but they get eroded from within, corroded from within, and just fall apart. It is obviously a disaster for a country like that. And then the expansion of NATO and the European Union, closer and closer, and then inside the virtual heart of the former Soviet Union in Ukraine, Georgia. I think if a similar thing was happening to United States and Europe, there would be a reaction, a strong reaction. So therefore, in terms purely of looking at it as objectively as one can, a case can be made that these are defensive moves, and we are therefore not obliged to join in this vilification and demonization of Russia and Putin and this and that. They still remain our biggest defense partner. Figures vary, but certainly about 60% of our defense equipment still is of Russian origin. And with the contract for the S-400 and 4 additional frigates and this helicopter contract that is being negotiated but has been decided, and some other contracts that would be in the offing, this defense relationship will continue to be very, very substantial. Though in terms of India's defense needs, which are very large, there is now ample room for defense ties with the United States, with Europe, and with Israel especially, which has become, in fact, a very important feature of our relationship with Israel. On the energy side, we had to wait a long time before we could go beyond Sakhalin-1. And now, partly because of pressures that Russia is under from the West, they have become much more open in terms of Indian investment in their energy sector. And they have also invested in our energy sector. And at least so far as government is concerned, the country in which we think we will invest the most in terms of our energy projects would be Russia. So that will also be an important element of the relationship as we go forward. We generally believe that Russia is important for international stability in terms of balancing, in terms of a balance in international relationship. And a weak Russia, and that's where we have a specific problem. A weak Russia is not helpful to our security, because the power gap that has, power vacuum that has occurred as a result of Russia's weakness is being filled by China. So China has covered up its flanks beautifully, if you like, taking advantage fully of the situation in its ambitions to challenge the West. He has covered his flanks with Russia. Russia has, in fact, in many ways now become dependent on China, and the equation has changed completely. I was involved officially in the first Russia, India, China dialogue. And Russian thought behind this, and then it evolved into BRIC, and then finally BRICS. And I could see in the years that I was involved how much Russia was dominating this trilateral and quadrilateral grouping. They were doing the talking, they were doing the analysis, they were pushing, how should I say, they were giving the orientation to the group in terms of positioning themselves on international issues. Today, with the decline of Russia and the phenomenal rise of China, the equation has changed. Even in Central Asia, it's China that is the dominant player. On the security side, Russia may have protected itself, but economics is very important for these countries. The Belt and Road Initiative actually is a vehicle for Chinese domination of the whole of Eurasia. And what Russia is now looking for is that it may get some fallout from that in terms of some connectivity through Siberia and this and that. And in fact, China is outflanking Russia in Europe. For Russia, apart from the CIS, the most important geographical area, geopolitical area for it is Europe. But China is also now outflanking Russia in terms of reaching out to Europe through the 16+1 dialogue. It is dividing the European Union. It has bought critical ports in Europe. And therefore, from our point of view, we just fail to comprehend why the United States has been treating and is still treating Russia as the principal enemy. And now, of course, China has been identified as a strategic adversary, but then both are being identified as strategic adversaries, and both are being given reasons to come together and try and push back the United States of America. At the same time, the United States is undermining Europe. They're against the European Union. They blast Germany. They tell Britain to get out, and they support Brexit. They make some confusing noises on NATO, so they're alienating to that extent their allies. So one doesn't know how this was going to add up in terms of dealing with China. Now, our problem, maybe, well, I'm an ex-diplomat, so that I can speak a little more freely. I think, to all intents and purposes, given today's configuration of India's foreign policy challenges, our biggest strategic adversary is China. There is no doubt about it. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to get into a situation where we have an actual conflict with China. We understand the gap that has developed between China and India, thanks largely to United States and Japan and Taiwan and others, and who have fueled China's rise and given this tremendous opportunity to build up these excess surplus capacities in all domains, which has undermined the global trading order, plus all the acquisitions that are made against China, which are being made now. But this has been in process for the last so many years. But the illusion was somehow that China will become democratic, will become supportive of the international order. They'll become a stakeholder. They'll move towards democracy. The middle class will push them towards it. On the contrary, China has become more and more authoritarian, more and more centralized. The Communist Party has become more and more powerful in shaping the country's economic, political, and security policies. Instead of moving towards a decentralization of power. Power has got more centralized, with President Xi Jinping now being president for life, if he so wishes. Xi Jinping openly decries Western-style democracy and is presenting China's own model, political and development model, to the rest of the world. And the BRI is a vehicle for China's geopolitical ambitions, where they are tying up the global markets to the Chinese economy. And it is such a huge project and such a ambitious project that there is nothing parallel to it today globally. And the remarkable thing is that it's under the control of one single country. You can have big projects, infrastructure here and there, financed by the World Bank or ADB or whatever have you. But here it's under the control of one single country. So this is a challenge for all of us. The other, of course, is speaking once again of the BRI, there's a thought that I'd like to leave with you, which is that no country in history has dominated the Asian landmass as well as the Indian Ocean simultaneously. This is the first time in history that one power has the ambition to dominate the Asian landmass, plus with its maritime strategy to dominate the Indian Ocean. The kind of expansion of the Chinese Navy is unprecedented if you look at the numbers that are involved. What is it for? It's not for protecting the Western Pacific. They don't need aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines and frigates and a 350 strong Navy with a defense budget which is second only to the United States of America. It's not for confining themselves to the Western Pacific. It is part of their geopolitical expansion, and India is right in the middle of it. And they have created a lot of problems for us in our neighborhood, beginning with Pakistan, which is an old story, having given them nuclear and missile technologies. But they are using Pakistan, and Pakistan is very happy to be used that way as an additional deterrent to India's power, and to try and checkmate India, keep it confined to the subcontinent as much as possible. And whatever advances India makes with great difficulty in the strategic sphere, China finds ways and means to neutralize that by giving similar technologies to Pakistan. It is protecting Pakistan even on terrorism. Masood Azhar's Jaish-e-Mohammed has been declared a terrorist organization way back in 2002 or something like that by the United Nations. But the remarkable thing is the chief of that organization is being protected by China and Pakistan from being declared terrorists, despite Masood Azhar's direct implication in terrorist attacks against India. They are willing to not only absorb the reaction in India to their obstinacy in protecting Pakistan and encouraging Pakistan on terrorism against India, but they're willing also to disregard the views of the other permanent members of the Security Council on this question, which shows the sense of confidence that they have developed, that they have enough power now to do as they please. And I suppose this reason that since America did this in the past, they are slowly reaching a stage where they can do this also. We had thought that after the occupation of Tibet, China would, and the fact that we recognize Tibet as part of China, that they would not try and cross the Himalayas and come into the Indian subcontinent to play power politics. And that Nepal would, that Tibet would really, in that sense, remain a buffer between India and China. But it's not happened. They have strongly entrenched themselves in Nepal, where they are creating big difficulties for us. In Sri Lanka, they have identified Sri Lanka as a very vital hub in their overall maritime strategy. And they have spent a lot of money in Sri Lanka, to the point that Sri Lanka has walked into a debt trap. And just as Hong Kong was handed over to British for a 99-year lease, so Sri Lanka has had to hand over Hanbantota to China on a 99-year lease. They disrupted our relations with Maldives very seriously. Fortunately, with the last elections, things have become better for us, but the challenge has not gone away. And whether in the months ahead, China will not once again use all the means at their command to make sure that they don't lose ground in Maldives, it will be something that we'll need to watch. And then, of course, Gwadar. It's clear that it'll become eventually a naval base for China, just as Djibouti is now a Chinese naval base. And this will see more and more Chinese nuclear submarines and other submarines coming into the Indian Ocean and creating more headaches for us. On the border issue, China has no inclination to resolve this. On the contrary, when our Prime Minister went to Arunachal Pradesh just a few days ago, the Chinese issued a long statement reprimanding India for complicating the dispute over Arunachal Pradesh, etc., etc. There are some people some amongst you, who've tried to understand the Wuhan spirit as to what was the thought behind this, as also Prime Minister Modi's statement at the Shangri-La dialogue on the Indo-Pacific concept, defining it not as a strategic concept but inclusive, etc., etc., and not directed against any country. Well, the Wuhan outreach, to my mind, had two reasons. One is that we absolutely need to manage our relationship with China, even as we have to be very clear-eyed about the Chinese threat to us. The aim is not to increase that threat and increase instability on the border. It doesn't help China to have that instability, but it is much less important to them. For us, it is far more important that the border is managed properly, because the repercussions of a disturbance on the border are felt immediately in our body politic in a very serious way. We have signaled to China at Doklam that beyond a certain point, if they push us, we will stand up, and there could be an actual risk of a conflict. Therefore, the focus has been on maintaining tranquility on the border, CBMs, and continuing to devise new and new mechanisms with hotlines here and hotlines there to make sure that there is no actual conflict on the border. And the engagement at the highest level, at the level of Xi Jinping, is intended from our side to make sure that, given Xi Jinping's position and his control of the PLA, that there is some constraint on the PLA not to create problems on the border for us. In other words, a political oversight, which is why if you find the statements after Wuhan and some other statements issued after the two leaders met, the Chinese don't speak about political oversight over the military on the border, whereas we emphasize that point, that we had an understanding of political oversight on the military dispositions on the border. And the second is the confusing signals that we get from the United States, because President Trump, whatever the politics or the diplomatic part of it, the Xi Jinping, I have great respect for him, he's my friend, reach out to him, we could have an agreement, we are moving forward, we are progressing, this and that. So what does one do if tomorrow the United States finds a modus vivendi with China? And we go out on a limb on the assumption that that the basic situation is not going to change in our disfavor. But we can't be sure of that. Therefore, we have to be a bit cautious before we follow in the train of how the United States, at least in the official documents, are looking at China and the whole trade war issue. And secondly, in terms of the Indo-Pacific concept, our genuine concern is that if we make the ASEAN nervous, that will undermine the Indo-Pacific strategy altogether. Because all these four countries which are part of the Indo-Pacific concept are not ASEAN countries. And ASEAN, until now, has actually been the focal point of any discussion on a regional security architecture in Asia. And if they feel that their centrality is being diluted, then we lose a lot of leverage. Which is why at Shangri-La in Singapore, the Prime Minister emphasized the centrality of ASEAN. And insofar as saying it's not a strategic concept and it's inclusive, all really it means is that there is no agreed joint strategy to corner China or to contain China. It's a concern that all countries have. And we'll build our cooperation based on those concerns, but the strategy, if you like, in inverted commas, is an evolving one depending on China's behavior. And when we say inclusive, which means if China changes its policies in the South China Sea, which they won't, and behaves as part of the international community, doesn't define its core interests unilaterally, and speaks about historical rights and define their position on sovereignty of China based on vague historical rights. Now, if they would actually change, yes, then they can be part of any peaceful arrangement in the Indian Ocean, and they can be participants. It's inclusive to that extent that if countries behave, then they can join the others in cooperative mechanisms, which gives a sense of stability to everyone. So I won't attach too much importance to that and underline the point that for us the issues on the border with China are disputed. Their territorial claims on us, which they continue to emphasize in a very aggressive way. The future of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, those issues, their maritime strategy, their policies in our neighborhood, the expansion of their navy, etc., are all fundamental things insofar as looking at the India-China relationship in the future is concerned. And we cannot but strengthen ourselves and expand our strategic capabilities so that China is in no position to put pressure on us bilaterally and together with Pakistan, confront us with a two-front situation. Well, I think I have spoken enough, otherwise you won't have much time for Q&A. But one couple of last thoughts, which I won't expand on because then it'll take me another 15-20 minutes. With Europe, our biggest trade partner is Europe. Europe collectively is a huge source of technology and investment, comparable to that of the United States of America. In all international forums, Europe's voice is very important. With individual countries, Japan, Germany, France, the UK, we have excellent ties. We don't have, when it comes to Europe's policies in our region, they follow in the wake of the United States of America. So they don't have any independent policy which is a cause of understanding of friction between us and Europe. If the United States changes its policies in our region, Europe will change. So In other words, actually, we don't have problem on the ground with the European Union, with Europe and the European Union, which is why in our conversations like this or otherwise, Europe doesn't seem to figure very much in our geopolitical thinking, which is really not the case. It does, but since the relationship is benign, so it's not an issue in terms of expressing differences of thinking and opinion in our media or elsewhere. The European Union is being very active now in terms of reaching out to India beyond the economic side. As you know, I don't have to tell you, they produced a paper in terms of their strategy towards India, which is a very positive thing. And I think India is open now, unlike in the past, we're much more open now to raise the level of our relationship with the European Union, notwithstanding the fact that with Brexit and the problem of Euro and Europe's and the weakening of the transatlantic alliance, at least for the time being, in terms of public discourse, and the inability of Europe to fashion an independent security and foreign policy. All these are things that actually detract from the image of the European Union as a big power. But there's another side to it, which I just mentioned. Our Act East policy continues as before, and is being given more strength. Japan is very collaborative. With the Gulf, we've had a remarkable change in our approach and policies, and that I would characterize as one of the biggest successes of Indian foreign policy in recent years. What it actually shows, apart from many other things, is that Islam is not a problem so far as India's relationship with the Islamic world is concerned. It's only with Pakistan, but not with the countries which are actually the founders of Islam. With the UAE, with the Saudi Arabia. UAE is remarkable. I was in Dubai yesterday. It's remarkable with the UAE things that are happening. And with Saudi Arabia too. And in terms of their investment in the energy sector, in the infrastructure, there are really very significant and real possibilities on the ground which will continue to transform the relationship. And I think I'll end here and we can perhaps have, is it 11:30?
Yep.